shockwave number one is a rockier road for China. Now, for most of the, thank you so much, Cheryl. So for most of the past 3 to 4 decades, as China has been engineering its economic and strategic rise, it has faced a fairly benign and welcoming external environment. The U.S. certainly has welcomed and facilitated China's rise, in particular facilitated China's entry into the World Trade Organization. It's a little bit, given where we are today with U.S.-China relations, it's a little bit ironic to reflect on this today, but I would argue that the biggest cheerleader that China has ever had was the President of the United States, Bill Clinton. And Clinton and other Western political leaders, and certainly the vast majority of the Western policy elite, believed strongly in the benefits associated with integrating China into the global trading system. And in particular, they felt there were 3 specific benefits. Number one, they thought as we integrated China, China would inevitably become a much more market-driven economy. Number two, they expected that there would be a certain degree of political liberalization in China. Nobody was anticipating a Jeffersonian democracy to spring up in China, but some degree of political liberalization was anticipated. And then the third expected outcome, in my judgment at least, was probably more than a little bit arrogant, but it was assumed and expected that China would become a quote-unquote responsible stakeholder in the US-led global order. So as we stand here today with 3 or 4 decades worth of hindsight, we can now see that those initial assumptions surrounding China's entry and integration into the global trade system were hopelessly naive and for the most part have turned out to be dead wrong. And so as a result, today, certainly in the United States, but not just in the United States, China's integration into the global economy, into the global trade system, at least in the specific way it was done, in terms of how its WTO membership and WTO enforcement was handled, is now seen as a strategic mistake. A strategic mistake which needs to be redressed through the more confrontational policies we're seeing, certainly beginning with the Trump administration and carrying through and in some respects intensifying under the Biden administration. Now, all of this raises one very important question, which is, so how will China assess this new strategic chessboard? That benign and welcoming environment that really facilitated its ability to execute its remarkable economic and strategic rise is no longer there. So what is China's assessment and how will China react? Honestly speaking, I don't think we know yet. I would not draw any conclusions about how China will react. At least thus far, China's response to some of the more confrontational policies, in particular the fairly draconian semiconductor restrictions that the Biden administration implemented on October 7th last year, China's response has been fairly muted. I think it would be a mistake, however, to assume that a more forceful response will not be forthcoming. China certainly has a number of points of leverage. The question or the challenge for China is how to take advantage of those points of leverage without shooting itself in the foot. Now, of course, one of the primary points of leverage is the size of China's market and the importance of that market to US companies. Now, as I'm sure it hasn't escaped the notice of anyone in this room, it seems recently that China's beginning to turn up the heat on U.S. companies. Micron Technologies, the Idaho-based semiconductor firm, has now come under a quote-unquote national security investigation. Micron does about $3.3 billion in annual sales in China. And of course, we've all been following with interest the different corporate offices in China that have been recently raided. Does that signal now that the screws are going to be tightened on U.S. companies? I don't know, but I think it's certainly worth us keeping an eye on.